The envelope was thick enough that Daniel Reyes felt it before he saw it. He was 3 steps from his pickup, a 2008 Silverado with more primer than paint, and the parking lot of Westbrook Plaza was empty except for a janitor wheeling a bucket toward the side entrance and the early November wind moving dead leaves in circles. It was 6:47 in the morning. He had 12 minutes before his first tenant call of the day, a broken garbage disposal in Unit 4B that the tenant had been reporting for 6 weeks, and that Daniel had been meaning to fix himself because the property management company that had been handling it had, in a most polite reading, been doing absolutely nothing. The envelope was lying half-tucked under the driver's side wiper. He stopped. He had been a maintenance supervisor at Westbrook Plaza for 11 years. Before that, 8 years at a smaller property in Reno. Before that, the Marine Corps, which he did not talk about much, and which people who knew him understood not to ask about. He had seen envelopes left on windshields before. They were always one of 3 things: a parking ticket, a note from a tenant who wanted to complain without having to do it to his face, or an advertisement. This was none of those. It was plain, unmarked, and heavy in a way that only one thing on earth is heavy: cash. If this is already pulling at something in you, hit the like button and subscribe to Quiet Kind. And drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. He was just a single dad. No one saw him coming. Keep watching. Daniel Reyes was 39 years old. He had a daughter named Sophia who was 11 and who slept in the bedroom of their 1-bedroom apartment while he slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. He had not slept in a bed of his own in 4 years. He did not consider this a hardship. Sophia had been through enough. Her mother had left when Sophia was 7. Not in the dramatic way, in the quiet, paperwork way. A woman who had decided somewhere around the 8th year of their marriage that the life she had chosen was not the life she wanted, and who had not had the particular kind of courage required to say so out loud, and had instead waited until Daniel was on a weekend maintenance call and had taken her things and a portion of their savings and left a note on the kitchen counter that Daniel still had, folded, in a drawer he did not open often. Sophia had read the note before he got home. He had walked in the door at 4:30 on a Sunday afternoon, and his 7-year-old daughter had been sitting at the kitchen table with the note in front of her, and she had looked up at him with an expression that was not crying, not yet, just trying to understand, and she had said, "Dad, I think Mom went away." That was 4 years ago. He did not think about it often because there was no productive shape for the thinking to take, but there were still mornings when the fact of it arrived fresh. Not the leaving itself, which had been processed and filed, but the specific image of his daughter at that table, at that age, reading adult handwriting about adult decisions, and working out what they meant. That image was not something he had figured out how to put down. He had raised her himself since then. Her grandmother on his side, his mother, came twice a week to help, and a neighbor 2 doors down named Mrs. Kaufman watched Sophia after school in the afternoons when Daniel's shift ran late. Beyond that, it was him. The cooking, the school meetings, the braided hair he had learned to do from a YouTube video at 2 in the morning with a sleeping 11-year-old on the couch beside him, and the specific patience of a man who had learned that some things cannot be rushed because a child will know instantly if you're rushing them. He made $47,000 a year as the maintenance supervisor at Westbrook Plaza, a 16-unit residential building on the east side of the city that had been owned for the past 23 years by a woman named Miriam Vance. Daniel had met her exactly once, 11 years ago, when she had hired him. She had been, at that time, a woman in her late 50s with iron gray hair and a precise way of speaking and a handshake that carried no apology in it. She had asked him 3 questions: his experience, his opinion on how to handle a tenant who was persistently late on rent, and whether he had any children. He had answered the first 2 professionally. On the third, he had told her he had a daughter, 2 years old at the time, and that he was a married man, and that he would be reliable because reliability was the only thing he had to offer. Miriam Vance had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had hired him and told him she expected him to do the job well, and to tell her directly if anything was ever not right. He had done the job well for 11 years. Nothing had ever not been right. Until the last 18 months. About a year and a half ago, the management of the building had been contracted out to a company called Prescott Capital Management, which had installed a property manager named Kyle Morrison a man in his early 30s who wore suits that fit him too well and who had a handshake that was all pressure and no grip. Kyle Morrison had arrived on his first day and had introduced himself to Daniel by saying, "I'm going to be making some changes around here," and had proceeded over the next 18 months to do exactly that. Rent increases on every tenant at renewal. Aggressive late fees. A new cleaning contractor who charged twice what the old one had and did half the work. A policy where maintenance requests had to be submitted through an online portal that at least 4 of the older tenants did not know how to use, which meant those tenants had simply stopped submitting requests, which meant their apartments had slowly been falling into disrepair for over a year. Daniel had tried to raise it with Kyle 3 separate times. The third time, Kyle had looked at him across the desk in the small management office on the first floor and had said, with the particular flat condescension of a man who had decided a long time ago what kind of person Daniel Reyes was, "Dan, you're the maintenance guy. I'm not going to take management advice from the maintenance guy." Daniel had not responded. He had walked out, gone back to fixing a leak in 2C, and had not raised it with Kyle again. He had, however, started keeping notes. He kept them in a small black notebook that he carried in the inside pocket of his work jacket. Dates, unfulfilled maintenance requests, tenants who had reported problems and been told to submit through the portal. The name of the elderly woman in 3A who had been without a working stove for 9 days and who had been buying meals at the corner store because she did not know how to file a complaint. He did not know what he was going to do with the notebook. He knew that a man who did not keep a record of things that were wrong had no standing to object to them later. That was what he had been raised to understand, and he had not, in 39 years, found any reason to revise it. The envelope on his windshield, he understood very quickly, was from Kyle Morrison. He knew this because he recognized the small pre-printed Prescott Capital Management logo on the back flap. He knew it because there was only one person who had reason to leave him cash without a note. And he knew it, most of all, because he had been expecting something like this for about a month. The rent collections at Westbrook Plaza were handled through the portal Kyle had installed. But 3 of the older tenants, Mrs. Delaney in 3A, Mr. and Mrs. Petrov in 1B, and a widower named Harold Kim in 4C, still paid their rent the way they had paid it for 20 years. Cash, in envelopes, hand-delivered to the management office on the first of the month. Kyle had not changed this policy, for the simple reason that trying to make 3 elderly tenants learn an online portal would have generated complaints that traveled up to Miriam Vance, and Kyle, whatever else he was not stupid about which fights to pick. Daniel had noticed, over the past 6 weeks, that the cash receipt for those 3 tenants had been logged into the building's accounting system in amounts that did not match what the tenants had actually paid. Mrs. Delaney paid $1,450 on the first of every month. The system had been recording $1,400. Mr. and Mrs. Petrov paid $1,600. The system had been recording $1,550. Harold Kim paid $1,375. The system had been recording $1,325. $50 here. $50 there. Across 3 tenants, over 6 weeks, it added up to about $900 that the tenants had paid and that had not been recorded as received. Daniel had only noticed because one of the tenants, Harold Kim, had casually mentioned to him in the hallway that he had paid his rent on the first and had asked whether the receipt he was about to receive in the mail would be the usual one. Daniel had made a non-committal sound, gone back to his work, and pulled the accounting logs that evening from the shared terminal in the maintenance office. The numbers were wrong. He had not raised it with anyone. He had written it down, with dates and amounts, in the black notebook. And now, 6 weeks in, there was a thick envelope on his windshield at 6:47 in the morning. And inside that envelope, Daniel understood with the particular clarity of a man who had spent 11 years reading situations that other people preferred not to read, was going to be a number that Kyle Morrison believed would solve the problem. Daniel stood in the parking lot for a long moment. The wind moved the dead leaves in another slow circle. He picked up the envelope. He did not open it there. He got in the truck, set the envelope on the passenger seat next to the thermos of coffee Sophia had filled for him before he left, drove 2 blocks to the diner on Madison, where he ate breakfast 3 mornings a week, and sat in a booth in the back with the envelope in his hands and the laminated menu he had not looked at in 4 years face down on the table. Then he opened it. It was $20,000. $200 bills, stacked and rubber banded in 2 groups of 100 each. There was no note. There did not need to be one. Daniel sat with it for about 90 seconds. He did not touch the bills a second time. He did not count them. He did not need to count them. He had known what the weight was in the parking lot, and he had known within 5 seconds of picking the envelope up that the amount was going to be substantial, and the only surprise now was the specific number, which was larger than he had expected, and which told him something important about how Kyle Morrison had assessed him. Kyle Morrison had decided that $20,000 was the price of Daniel's silence. $20,000. Daniel's rent was $1,200 a month. He was currently 41 days late on it, a fact Kyle Morrison was certainly aware of, because Kyle Morrison was the one who had processed the late notice that had been left on Daniel's door the previous Friday. He had been late on rent exactly twice in 11 years. Both times had been in the last 6 months, and both times had been because Sophia had needed medical things, a filling that had become a root canal, a specialist appointment for a recurring stomach problem that her pediatrician had not been able to resolve, that had eaten into the narrow margin Daniel lived inside. He had told himself he would be caught up by Thanksgiving. He had told himself this the way a man tells himself things that are not lies, exactly, but that depend on nothing else going wrong between now and then, which was the kind of assumption that Daniel Reyes, at 39 years old with 11 years of watching things go wrong for other people, knew was not an assumption a careful man made. $20,000 was 16 months of rent. $20,000 was the full amount of the credit card debt Daniel had accumulated in the 4 years since his wife had left, most of it medical, some of it the replacement of the water heater in their apartment that the management company had declined to cover. $20,000 was, almost to the dollar, what a decent used car cost, which was relevant, because the Silverado's transmission was making a sound that Daniel, who had rebuilt 3 transmissions in his life, recognized as the sound of a transmission that was going to fail within the next 4 months. $20,000 was a new laptop for Sophia, who had been borrowing one from her school because Daniel could not afford one, and the science fair project she was starting to design, and a summer camp she had mentioned once in passing and then never again because she had understood, at 11, that mentioning something a second time made her father look at her with an expression she did not want to cause. $20,000 was every quiet need he had been ignoring for 4 years. He sat in a booth for a long time. The waitress, a woman named Carla who had known Daniel for 6 years and who brought him his coffee without asking because she had memorized his order a long time ago, came by once, looked at his face, looked at the envelope, and went away without speaking. Daniel thought about Sophia. He thought about Sophia specifically, not in the abstract, not as a concept of daughterhood, but as the particular 11-year-old who had her mother's dark hair and her father's steady eyes and a way of coming home from school and telling him, without being asked, the 3 most interesting things that had happened to her that day because she understood instinctively that her father wanted to know, and that his knowing was part of how their house held together. He thought about her 41 days of knowing rent was late. She had not been told. He had never told her anything about money. But she was 11 years old, and she was not stupid, and she had noticed that he had not been sleeping well, and she had noticed that he had twice this week said he was not hungry at dinner and given her half of what was on his plate, and last night she had sat on the pull-out couch beside him and had said, with the particular seriousness of a child who has been saving up a sentence, "Dad, if you need me to eat less, I can eat less. I'm okay." He had told her, his voice very even, that she was going to eat exactly what she had been eating, and that she was not to worry about any of this, because it was not for her to worry about. She had nodded. She had not. He noticed, looked reassured. Daniel sat in the booth, and he thought about his daughter saying that to him. And he thought about Kyle Morrison leaving $20,000 on the windshield of his truck, and he understood several things in fairly rapid succession. He understood that Kyle Morrison had chosen $20,000 because Kyle had somehow calculated that it was more money than Daniel's conscience could refuse. He understood that Kyle had calculated this from what he knew about Daniel, that Daniel was 41 days behind on rent, that Daniel was a single father, that Daniel drove a truck that was falling apart, that Daniel had a daughter and a tight margin and a life that could, with this amount of money, be meaningfully rearranged. And he understood that Kyle, in making that calculation, had revealed something about Kyle. That Kyle Morrison genuinely believed that every man had a price, and that the price of a man like Daniel Reyes was, in Kyle's professional judgment, $20,000 in unmarked bills left on a windshield at dawn. Daniel closed the envelope. He put on the seat beside him. He drank his coffee, which had gone cold, and he understood, sitting there, that the question in front of him was not about the money at all. The question was about what kind of man his daughter was going to remember him as 20 years from now, when she was older than he was right now, and trying to understand the shape of the childhood she had been raised inside. That was the question. The money was just the shape the question had arrived in. He paid his check. He left Carla a $2 tip, which was what he always left, because the number had to stay the same whether he was carrying $2 in his wallet or $20,000 on the passenger seat of his truck, because that was the specific discipline that separated the man he wanted his daughter to remember from every other kind of man he could have become. He drove to the building. The sun was just coming over the tree line when he pulled into the parking lot. The janitor was gone. The building was waking up, lights in windows, the first of the early commuters pulling out of their spots. Daniel sat in his truck for a moment with the envelope in his lap. Then he got out, locked the truck, and walked into the building with the envelope tucked under his arm, the way a man carries a thing he has not yet decided what to do with, but has decided completely that he is not going to hide. The elevator in the main lobby was out of service. Had been for 3 days because the service contract Kyle had negotiated with the new elevator company required a 72-hour response window that Daniel had flagged as unacceptable in a memo that had been, as far as he could tell, read by no one. He took the stairs to the second floor, walked down the carpeted hallway past 2A and 2B, and let himself into the maintenance office at the end of the corridor with the key he had carried on his belt for 11 years. The office was small. A desk, a corkboard with schematics pinned to it, a filing cabinet, a coffee maker Daniel had bought himself because the one the building had provided was older than his daughter. He set the envelope on the desk, closed the door behind him, and sat down in the chair he had sat in 5 mornings a week for 11 years. He did not open the envelope again. He opened the black notebook. He turned to a blank page, wrote the date, wrote 6:47 a.m. Envelope on windshield, $20,000 cash, no note, no return contact information, and then paused with the pen above the page. Then he wrote, in the same even handwriting, received by me. Not counted in full, not spent, to be returned. He underlined to be returned. Then he closed the notebook. He sat for a moment. He picked up the phone on the desk, the old building landline that Kyle had tried to have removed 6 months ago and had been overruled on by the fire marshal. And he dialed a number he had memorized 11 years ago and had used exactly 3 times in all those years, each time for a problem that had required authority beyond his own. The phone rang twice. A woman answered. Vance. Her voice was older than he remembered, but it was unmistakably her voice. Iron gray, precise, no apology in it. Mrs. Vance, Daniel said. This is Daniel Reyes. I'm a maintenance supervisor at Westbrook Plaza. I don't know if you remember me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not a confused pause. A pause of a woman who was thinking. Mr. Reyes, Miriam Vance said. I remember you. Ma'am, Daniel said. I need to speak with you. In person, if possible. I have something that I believe you need to see. Another pause. Is it urgent? I believe it is, yes. Can it wait until 10 o'clock this morning? It can. Then be at the building's management office at 10, she said. I will be there. Daniel said, yes, ma'am. She hung up first. Daniel sat with the receiver in his hand for a long moment before he set it back in the cradle. He had not expected her to pick up on the second ring. He had not, in truth, expected her to pick up at all. He had been prepared to leave a message with whoever answered for her, a secretary or an assistant, a person whose job was to filter calls from people like Daniel Reyes. He had not considered the possibility that the woman herself would answer her own phone at 7:04 in the morning, and that she would remember him, and that she would clear her schedule for a maintenance supervisor she had met exactly once, 11 years ago. He did not know what that meant. He filed it away. He spent the next 2 hours doing his job. He fixed the garbage disposal in 4B, which took 11 minutes and a replacement flange he had been carrying in his truck for 2 weeks. He looked in on Mrs. Delaney in 3A, whose stove was still not working because the part Kyle had refused to authorize had not been ordered, and Daniel told her, quietly, that he would have the stove working by the end of the week, one way or another. Mrs. Delaney, who was 76 years old and who had lived in the building for 31 of those years, looked at him for a long moment and said, "Daniel, you're a good man." He said, "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job." She said, "I know. That's what I mean." He did not know what to do with that, either. He left her apartment at 9:41 and walked down to the first floor management office with the envelope tucked under his arm and the black notebook in the inside pocket of his jacket. The office door was closed. Kyle Morrison's Audi was in the parking lot, which meant Kyle was somewhere in the building, probably in the office, which was where he spent most of his mornings drinking coffee and doing whatever it was he did on his laptop that never seemed to produce any actual property management. Daniel knocked. The door opened. Kyle was there in a navy suit, a white shirt, and the expression of a man who had not been expecting company. "Dan," Kyle said. He glanced at the envelope under Daniel's arm. His face did something subtle. Not a smile, not a flinch, but a small adjustment, the way a man adjusts his posture when he realizes the person in front of him has seen a thing he did not intend them to see. "What can I do for you this morning?" "I need to use the office," Daniel said. "Miriam Vance is coming at 10. Kyle's face did something more. "I'm sorry. Miriam Vance," Daniel said, "the owner of the building. She's coming at 10. I need to meet with her in here." Kyle stared at him. "Why is she coming?" "I asked her to come." Kyle stopped. He looked at the envelope under Daniel's arm again. He looked at Daniel's face. Daniel watched him work through it. The way a man watches a machine he has built himself begin to misfire in a way he had not anticipated. "Dan, can we talk for a minute?" "Come in." "Close the door." Daniel came in. He did not close the door. "I think we can work this out between ourselves," Kyle said, his voice dropping into a register that was meant to sound collegial and did not quite get there. "There's no need to involve Mrs. Vance. She's a busy woman. She doesn't need to be bothered with building-level things." "I agree that she's busy," Daniel said. "Then let's." "I don't agree that this is a building-level thing." Kyle stopped. Daniel set the envelope on the desk. "This was on my windshield at 6:47 this morning," he said. "I am returning it to the person who left it there." Kyle looked at the envelope. He did not pick it up. He did not deny that he had left it. He did not say anything at all for about 8 seconds, and in that 8 seconds Daniel watched the man's face cycle through several expressions: surprise, calculation, something like contempt, and finally a kind of settling, the settling of a man who has decided which story he is going to tell. "Dan," Kyle said, "I think you're confused about what that is." "No," Daniel said. "I don't think I am. That's a bonus. It's an end-of-year bonus. I was going to give it to you officially next month, but I thought—" "Kyle," Daniel said. He did not raise his voice. He had never raised his voice in 11 years at the building. "I've worked here for 11 years. The most I've ever been given as a bonus was $400. That was 5 years ago, from Miriam Vance directly, for staying through Christmas to fix the boiler. He did not give me a $20,000 end-of-year bonus. I have a notebook upstairs with every unrecorded rent payment from the last 6 weeks written in it. And I'm returning your money." Kyle's face went very still. Daniel had seen that stillness before. He had seen it on the faces of men in Iraq who had just realized the situation they were in was not the situation they had prepared for. He had seen it on the face of his own father once a long time ago, when his father had been caught doing something he should not have been doing. It was the stillness of a man calculating whether to negotiate or to attack. "Dan," Kyle said, his voice very quiet, "I don't think you understand what you're doing. If this story has found its way to you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Quiet Kind. Your support is what keeps these stories coming, and there are so many more waiting to be told." "I think I do," Daniel said. "You're 40 days behind on rent." 41. "You have a daughter." Daniel looked at him. He did not speak. The silence in the room became, very quickly, a different kind of silence. Kyle saw it. Daniel watched him see it. Watch Kyle realize, in real time, that bringing Sophia into this sentence had been a mistake of a magnitude Kyle had not fully understood until he saw Daniel's face. "I didn't mean," Kyle started. "Kyle," Daniel said. "Stop talking." Kyle stopped. Daniel stepped back from the desk. He left the envelope exactly where he had placed it. He looked at Kyle Morrison, a man whose suit cost more than a month of Daniel's rent and whose watch, Daniel noted with a kind of distant clarity, was a Rolex that had to have cost at least $8,000. And he thought, this is a man who left $20,000 on a windshield and didn't flinch because it was never his money. Mrs. Vance will be here at 10, Daniel said. I'd suggest you be somewhere else. He walked out. He closed the door behind him with the specific care of a man who did not intend to slam anything. He went back up to the maintenance office. He sat at the desk. He took off his work jacket and folded it across the chair. He took the black notebook out of its pocket and placed it squarely in the center of the desk. And he waited. At 9:58, he heard a car door in the parking lot. He did not look out the window. He knew the sound of a car being driven by a professional driver. The specific way such cars stopped, the measured pause before a door was opened, the absence of the small, hurried noises that civilians made. He stood, put his jacket back on, picked up the notebook, and walked downstairs. He reached the first floor at 10 o'clock exactly. The woman standing in the lobby of Westbrook Plaza was not the woman he had met 11 years ago, exactly, but she was recognizably the same person. She was in her late 60s now. Her hair was fully white. She wore a charcoal wool coat over a dark suit, and she stood with her hands folded in front of her, watching the elevator bank. And when Daniel came down the stairs, she turned and saw him, and did not smile, but did do something with her face that was almost a smile, a softening, brief, and controlled. Mr. Reyes, she said. Mrs. Vance. Thank you for calling me. He did not know what to say to that, so he did not say anything. He nodded instead, and gestured toward the management office door, which was now closed. Kyle's Audi, he had noted on his way down, was no longer in the parking lot. Is Mr. Morrison not joining us? Miriam asked. I asked him to step out. Her eyes went to his face and stayed there for a long moment. Did you? Yes, ma'am. Let's go in. He opened the door for her. She walked in ahead of him, took off her coat, folded it across the back of the chair opposite Kyle's empty desk, and sat down with the precise, unhurried movements of a woman who had been sitting down in rooms like this one for 40 years. She looked around the office once. She noted, Daniel saw, the envelope still sitting on the desk where he had placed it. She did not ask about it. Mr. Reyes, she said. Please. Sit. He sat. He put the notebook on the desk, not open, just placed there. Ma'am, he said, before I say anything else, I need you to know that I have not come here to ask you for anything. I'm not asking for a raise. I'm not asking for a job change. I'm not asking you to do anything except look at what I have to show you and make your own decisions about it. Miriam Vance looked at him. Noted, she said. The envelope on the desk, Daniel said, contains $20,000 in cash. It was placed on the windshield of my truck this morning at approximately 6:47 by Kyle Morrison. He has not denied that he placed it there. I believe it was intended to secure my silence about certain financial irregularities in how rent payments have been recorded over the last 6 weeks. Miriam did not move. Daniel opened the black notebook. He turned to the pages he had spent 6 weeks writing, the careful dated entries, the amounts paid by the 3 elderly tenants, the amounts recorded in the building's accounting system, the discrepancy column he had been updating every week. He turned the notebook around so that it faced her. She did not pick it up. She read it where it lay, her eyes moving slowly down the page, and then the next page, and then the next. She read for almost 3 full minutes in complete silence. Daniel sat across from her and did not speak because he had nothing to add, and because he had been raised to understand that when a person was reading, you did not interrupt them to explain what they were reading. When she finished, she closed the notebook. She looked at him. Mr. Reyes, she said, why did you keep these records? Because, Daniel said, I didn't know what else to do with what I was seeing. You could have confronted Mr. Morrison directly. I did, ma'am. About other things. Not this specifically. The first 3 times I raised maintenance issues with him, he made it clear he was not going to take management advice from me. I kept the notebook because I thought at some point someone who could actually do something about it was going to need to see it. And you thought that someone would be me. Eventually. Yes, ma'am. She was quiet for a moment. Mr. Reyes, she said, you understood this morning when you found the envelope that you could have kept that money. You understood that no one would have known. Mr. Morrison certainly would not have said anything. The three elderly tenants would have continued paying their rent without being the wiser. I myself, very likely, would have remained unaware. Correct? Understood that, yes. $20,000, she said, is a significant amount of money for a man in your circumstances. I'm told you are behind on your rent. Daniel's jaw tightened. How did you know that, ma'am? Because I have known you were behind on your rent for 3 weeks. Mr. Morrison's office submits a late payment report to my office on the 5th of every month. I have reviewed that report personally every month for the last 23 years. I noticed 3 weeks ago that your name was on it for the second time in 6 months, and I pulled your employment file, and I reviewed it, and I understood that something in your life had become more financially difficult than it had been before. Daniel did not know what to say to this. I also, she said, know about your daughter. He looked at her. I don't know what you mean, ma'am. Mr. Reyes, when I hired you 11 years ago, I asked you about your family. I ask every person I hire about their family. I do this because I have learned in 51 years of running businesses that the most reliable predictor of whether a person will be honest in difficult situations is whether they are raising someone who depends on them. You told me you had a 2-year-old daughter. I noted it in your file. Over the years, my office has received 3 notes from you, maintenance reports that cross my desk through other channels. 2 of them mentioned your daughter in passing in the context of why you had rescheduled a project. I remember that you had a daughter. I know that you have been raising her alone since she was 7. I know this because when your employment status changed from married to single, you filed the paperwork yourself with Mr. Morrison's predecessor, and that paperwork was copied to my office, and I read it. Daniel stared at her. I don't run my buildings from a distance, Mr. Reyes, Miriam Vance said. I just don't intervene until I need to. He did not know how to respond. He had spent 11 years assuming he was invisible in the structure of this building, that the woman who owned it did not know his name, did not remember his face, did not think about him or the other people like him who kept the building running. And sitting across from her now, he was being told with quiet precision that she had known about him the entire time, that she had known about his daughter, that she had read his paperwork, that she had, in her own distant, unshowy way, been keeping an eye on him for 11 years. He did not trust himself to speak for a moment. Miriam watched him. Mr. Reyes, she said, what do you want me to do with what you've shown me? Nothing, ma'am. Nothing. You asked me that when I called you this morning whether I was calling for a reason. I'm not. I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm here because I thought you should know what your property manager is doing in your building. What you decide to do about it is your decision. It's not my place to tell you how to run your business. And the envelope. Daniel looked at the envelope on the desk. I'd like to return it to Mr. Morrison, he said. Through you, if that's acceptable. I'd rather not hand it back to him personally. Why not? Because, ma'am, I'm going to be honest with you. The last sentence he said to me this morning before I walked out of this office referenced my daughter. And I would prefer not to be in a small room with him again today. Miriam Vance's expression did not change visibly, but something in her posture did. A settling. The settling of a woman who had just confirmed, beyond any remaining doubt, a thing she had been considering. I see, she said. She stood up. She picked up Daniel's notebook. Mr. Reyes, she said, come with me, please. Ma'am, I have something I'd like to show you. It will take approximately 30 minutes of your morning. I understand that you have other work to do. I will ensure that you are not penalized for the time. Mrs. Vance, Mr. Reyes, she said, you have shown me something this morning that I do not think you fully understand the significance of. I am asking you to extend me 30 minutes so that I can explain. He looked at her. Yes, ma'am. She picked up her coat. He followed her out of the office, across the lobby, and out into the parking lot, where a dark sedan was waiting with a driver standing beside it. The driver opened the rear door. Miriam Vance got in. She gestured for Daniel to follow. He hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then he got in. The driver closed the door behind him. The car began to move. The car moved through the city in a direction Daniel did not immediately recognize. He had lived in this city for 17 years, and he knew most of its geography the way a working man knows a place. Which streets had potholes, which bridges iced over first, which neighborhoods he did not take a call in after dark. But the car turned off the arterial road that led downtown and climbed a hill Daniel had driven past 1,000 times without ever having reason to ascend, and within 10 minutes they were in a part of the city Daniel had only ever seen from below. Miriam Vance did not speak during the drive. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the window. And Daniel, who had been raised to understand that silence in the company of a person like Miriam Vance was not awkwardness but a gift she was extending, did not try to fill it. The car pulled up in front of a building. Daniel had seen this building before. Everyone in the city had seen this building. It was a 34-story tower of steel and dark glass that occupied a full city block on the east side of the business district, and across the top of it, in letters that were lit at night and visible from 3 neighborhoods away, was a single word: Vance. Daniel looked at it through the car window for a long moment. Then he looked at Miriam. "Ma'am," he said carefully. "Mr. Reyes," she said. "Westbrook Plaza is one of 147 residential properties owned by Vance Holdings. It is, in terms of the overall portfolio, one of the smaller ones. I bought it 23 years ago because it was the first commercial property I ever owned, and I have kept it because I do not sell things that matter to me. Please come inside." The driver opened the door. Daniel got out. He followed Miriam Vance across a plaza of polished granite, through a set of revolving glass doors, past a security desk where 2 uniformed men stood up simultaneously and said Mrs. Vance in the clipped way of men who had said those 2 syllables thousands of times, and into a private elevator that required a key card which Miriam produced from her coat pocket without ceremony. The elevator began to rise. "Mr. Reyes," she said, as the floor indicator climbed past 15, past 20, past 25. "I'm going to ask you 3 questions. I would appreciate honest answers." "Yes, ma'am." Question 1. When you found the envelope on your windshield this morning, did you consider keeping the money? Daniel thought about it. "For about 4 seconds, ma'am." "Yes." "What were the 4 seconds about?" "My daughter, ma'am. I thought about what I could do for her with it." "And what made you decide against it?" "I thought about what I couldn't undo if I took it. What I'd have to tell her later, if she ever asked. And what I'd have to not tell her for the rest of her life." Miriam nodded once. "Question 2, she said. "Why did you not confront Mr. Morrison about the rent discrepancies directly the moment you discovered them?" "2 reasons, ma'am. The first is that I didn't think he would stop. I thought he would just get better at hiding it. The second is that I work for you, not for him. If I'd confronted him and he'd fired me, I'd have lost the ability to protect the 3 tenants I was trying to protect. I thought keeping the notebook and bringing it to you later was the only move that actually worked." Miriam was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Reyes," she said, "that is the answer of a man who has commanded a unit." Daniel did not answer. She did not press him. "Question 3, she said. "Do you know why I remembered you after 11 years?" "No, ma'am." The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto a floor that was, Daniel understood immediately, the top floor of the building. The lobby of the executive suite. A reception desk in front of a wall of dark wood. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking south over the city. A woman at the reception desk who stood up and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Vance," with a professionalism that did not look up from Miriam to Daniel with any of the curiosity Daniel had expected. "Good morning, Helen," Miriam said. "Is the boardroom available?" "Yes, ma'am. And Mr. Caldwell is in his office. Ask him to join us in 15 minutes, please." "Yes, ma'am." Miriam walked down the hall. Daniel followed. She led him not to the boardroom, but past it to a corner office with double doors. She opened the doors herself, and Daniel stepped through them, and what he saw inside made him stop. The office was not large. It was the size of a living room in a modest house. The desk was not particularly grand. There was a couch, 2 chairs, a low coffee table, a credenza against one wall with a single framed photograph on it. The photograph was old, a black-and-white shot of a man in his 30s standing beside a 2-story building, shading his eyes against the sun, looking at the camera with an expression Daniel recognized, because it was an expression he had seen on his own face in his own mirror more times than he could count. The expression of a man who had decided something all the way down. "My husband," Miriam said, seeing where Daniel was looking. "Thomas Vance. He died 31 years ago. He built the first 3 properties in our portfolio. I built everything else. Daniel nodded. "Sit, please, Mr. Reyes." He sat on the couch. Miriam sat in the chair opposite. She placed his black notebook on the coffee table between them, precisely as though it were a document of importance. "To your third question," she said,